A 75-year-old man hears a voice in the middle of the desert. Not a visible angel, not thunder from the sky, a voice. And the voice says, "Leave everything. Your home, your family, your land. Go to a place I will show you, and I will make you into a great nation." This man had no children. His wife was barren. He had no no territory, not a single ally. And yet he went. From this decision, from this insane walk of an old man without heirs toward the unknown, was born the most influential, most persecuted, and most indestructible people in human history. A people who survived pharaohs, empires, exiles, and massacres. A people who gave the world the Bible, monotheism, and the man who divided history into before and after. But how? How did a family of landless nomads turn into all of this? And why did God choose them specifically? This is the story you are about to hear now. 4,000 years compressed into 60 minutes, from the dust of Eden to the first Christians. And I warn you, this story is more violent, more surprising, and more impossible than anything Hollywood has ever tried to put on a screen. But to understand the people of God, you need to understand why God needed a people. And for that, we go back to the absolute beginning of everything. Genesis 1 describes creation in 6 days. Light, sky, earth, seas, plants, animals. And on the 6th day, God does something different from everything that came before. He doesn't say, "Let there be." He says, "Let us make. Let us make man in our image and likeness." It is the only moment of creation where God uses the plural, as if he were facing a decision that weighed more than all the others. Adam is formed from the dust of the ground, Eve from his rib. God plants a garden eastward in Eden, and the biblical description of this place is anything but abstract. Genesis 2 speaks of rivers with real names, the Tigris and the Euphrates, which still exist today and cut through modern Iraq. It speaks of gold, bdellium, and onyx stone. It was a physical place with coordinates, with geography, and in the center of the garden, 2 trees, the tree of life, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. 1 rule, a single rule: do not eat from this tree. From all the others, yes; from this one, no. And here begins the pattern that will repeat for the next 4,000 years of human history. God offers a covenant, the human being breaks it. The serpent convinces Eve. Eve eats, Adam eats. And in that instant, something breaks that will never again be repaired by human hands. Direct intimacy of God. It was over. For the first time, the text says they felt shame. For the first time, they hid. God expels the two from the garden. He places cherubim with flaming swords guarding the entrance. And humanity begins its journey on the outside. But, and here is a detail most people ignore, in the middle of the curse, God hides a promise, Genesis 3:15. He says to the serpent, "The offspring of the woman will crush your head." It is the first messianic prophecy in the Bible. Even before a people existed, before Abraham, before Moses, before David, God already had a rescue plan. And the fall spreads fast. Cain kills Abel. The first murder in history is a fratricide. Violence multiplies so quickly that in just a few generations, Genesis 6 describes the earth as a place where every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time. Not partially, not sometimes. Continually. God regrets having created human beings. The Hebrew text uses the word nachan, which carries pain, not just a change of mind. It is a God who feels, and what he feels in this moment is deep mourning. But in the middle of a corrupted humanity, one man walks in the opposite direction. Noah. Genesis 6:9 says that Noah was a righteous man, blameless among the people of his time, and that he walked with God. In a world where even breathing seemed contaminated by evil, one man held the line, and God gives him an order that sounds like madness. Build a boat. Not just any boat, a structure 140 meters long, 23 wide, and 14 high, larger than a football field. 3 decks, coated with pitch inside and out. No motor, no sail, no rudder. It wasn't a ship, it was a box designed to float and survive. Noah spent decades building it. Jewish tradition speaks of 120 years. Imagine the mockery. A man in the middle of the continent directing the largest vessel anyone of that time had ever seen, preparing for rain that had never fallen. Because the text suggests that before the flood, the earth had never experienced rain as we know it. Then came the flood, 40 days and 40 nights, but it wasn't just rain. Genesis 7:11 says that the springs of the great deep burst forth. The ground split open. Water rose from below and fell from above at the same time. The earth was literally swallowed. 8 people survived. 8 in the entire planet. Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. When the ark finally rested on the mountains of Ararat and the door opened, the world they knew had disappeared. No cities, no roads, no neighbors. Total silence. A restart from zero. God makes a new covenant with Noah, never again to destroy the earth with water. And he places the rainbow as a sign, not as decoration, but as a contract. Every time it rains and the bow appears, it is God reaffirming that promise made to a man soaked in mud on the top of a mountain. But here comes something that will frustrate you. Humanity did not learn. Noah's descendants multiply, they spread, and their first great collective decision is to build the Tower of Babel, a tower that would touch the sky, not to worship God, but to make a name for themselves. The same arrogance, the same independence. God comes down, and the text literally says comes down, confuses the languages and scatters them across the face of the earth. Nations are formed, peoples, cultures, languages, everything is born from this moment. But the practical result is that humanity is lost again, fragmented, worshipping idols, sinking into the same cycle. And here, in chapter 12 of Genesis, God changes strategy. Instead of dealing with all of humanity, he chooses one man, Abram, who would later be called Abraham, a man from Ur of the Chaldeans, likely in the region of modern Iraq, the son of an idol maker, according to Jewish tradition, someone who grew up in the cradle of idolatry, and God speaks to him. Genesis 12 verses 1-3, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." Pay attention to that last phrase, all peoples on earth. God is not choosing a people to privilege them and abandon the rest. He is choosing a channel, an instrument, a lineage through which the blessing will reach everyone. This is the contract that foundations the entire story that follows. Abraham was 75 years old when he left. Sarah, his wife, was barren, and the promised land, Canaan, was already occupied by other peoples. So what God promised was an impossible son, an occupied land, and a nation that did not exist. Everything in the future, everything depending on faith. And Abraham stumbled more than once. He lied about Sarah twice, saying she was his sister to protect himself. He tried to manufacture the promise on his own when he had a son, Ishmael, with the servant Hagar, because he was tired of waiting. He was human, flawed, fearful at times, but he kept walking. And when Abraham was 100 years old and Sarah was 90 years old, Isaac was born, the son of the promise, the impossible that became flesh and bone. If this already seems intense, hold on, because God is going to ask for this son back. Genesis 22 is one of the most disturbing scenes in the entire Bible. God says to Abraham, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the region of Moriah and sacrifice him there as a burnt offering." Think about the weight of those words. Your son, your only one, whom you love. God leaves no room for emotional distancing. He makes sure to name the bond before asking for the sacrifice. Abraham wakes up early, cuts the wood, saddles the donkey, and walks for 3 days with Isaac toward Mount Moriah. 3 days. walking in silence beside the son he's going to sacrifice. Imagine what was going through that man's head with every step. On the way, Isaac asks, "Father, the fire and wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" And Abraham answers one of the most loaded phrases in all of Scripture. God himself will provide the lamb. He binds Isaac. He places the boy on the altar. He raises the knife. And at the last second, an angel shouts from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham, do not lay a hand on the boy." God never wanted Isaac's death. It was a test, the most extreme a father could face. And Abraham passed, not because he didn't feel pain, but because he trusted that God knew what he was doing, even when nothing made sense. And here is something that gives you chills when you connect the dots. Mount Moriah, where Abraham almost sacrificed Isaac, is the same place where Solomon will build the Temple of Jerusalem 1,000 years later. And it is the same region where, 2,000 years in the future, God will indeed deliver his own son. The lamb that Abraham said God would provide showed up. It just took 20 centuries. If you believe that nothing in the Bible is a coincidence, comment below. God is faithful. Isaac grows up. He marries Rebekah, and he has twin sons who fight from their mother's womb, Esau and Jacob. Esau, the eldest, a hunter, impulsive, visceral. Jacob, the youngest, quiet, calculating, cunning. Jacob deceives his blind father, steals the blessing of the firstborn, and flees to escape his brother's fury. And there, fleeing alone through the desert, he has a dream. A ladder connecting earth to heaven, with angels ascending and descending. And God speaks from the top, "I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying." The promise did not die. It jumped from Abraham to Isaac, and from Isaac to Jacob. And Jacob, who would go through 20 years of exile, cheating, forced labor, and an entire night physically wrestling with God, would receive a new name. Israel, the one who struggles with God. The people of God do not carry the name of a saint. They carry the name of a fighter. Jacob, now Israel, had 12 sons. 12. And from those 12 would be born the 12 tribes of Israel. The family was growing. The promise made to a childless man was multiplying. But this family was anything but functional. Jacob's favorite was Joseph, the second to last son, born to Rachel, the woman he truly loved. Jacob gave Joseph a special robe with long sleeves and vibrant colors, which in the ancient world meant one thing: you don't have to work. You are the heir. The brothers hated Joseph, and that hatred turned into a conspiracy. Joseph was 17 years old when his own brothers threw him into an empty cistern in the middle of the desert. 10 grown men surrounding a teenager, stripping off his robe, debating whether to kill him or sell him. They decided to sell. 20 pieces of silver. The price of a slave in the Middle Eastern market around 1900 BC. Joseph was taken to Egypt, from favorite son to slave, from slave to prisoner, after being falsely accused by his master's wife. And in prison, something happened that no one could have predicted. Joseph began to interpret dreams with a supernatural precision that caught even Pharaoh's attention. Pharaoh had a dream that no magician in Egypt could decipher. 7 fat cows devoured by 7 skinny cows. 7 full ears of grain swallowed by 7 thin ears. Joseph interpreted 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of brutal famine. And he didn't just interpret, he presented an economic plan. Stockpile 20% of all production during the good years to survive the bad ones. Pharaoh made Joseph the governor of Egypt. In one day, Joseph came out of prison and received Pharaoh's signet ring, a gold chain, and fine linen clothes. He was 30 years old. 13 years after being thrown into a hole by his own brothers, he was ruling the most powerful nation in the world. And when the famine came, just as Joseph said it would, it hit the entire world, including Canaan, including Jacob's family. Joseph's brothers went down to Egypt to buy food, and they came face to face with the brother they had sold as a slave without recognizing him. Joseph, dressed as an Egyptian, speaking Egyptian, sitting on the second most powerful throne on earth. The reunion took months. Joseph tested his brothers, pressured them, provoked them, until he couldn't take it anymore. Genesis 45 says he wept so loudly that the Egyptians in the next room heard him. And he said, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" And then came the phrase that summarizes this entire story. "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." The whole family, 70 people, moved to Egypt. Jacob, old and blind, hugged the son he thought had been dead for 20 years. And there, in the Nile Delta, in the land of Goshen, the 12 tribes of Israel settled. If this story is surprising you, leave a like now so more people can get to know this history. They were protected, they were fed, they were rowing. But what seemed like a happy ending was actually a 400-year trap. Genesis ends in peace. But between the last verse of Genesis and the first of Exodus, more than 300 years passed. 300 years of silence. The Bible does not record a single word from God in this interval. No prophet, no vision, no dream. Just time passing and the people growing. And they grew. Exodus 1:7 says that the Israelites were exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. From 70 people to somewhere between 2 and 3 million in 4 centuries. A demographic explosion that did not go unnoticed, because a new pharaoh rose to the throne, one who did not know Joseph, who had never heard of the Hebrew governor who saved Egypt from famine. To this pharaoh, the Israelites were not allies, they were a threat. Too foreign, too numerous, too strong. Slavery began slowly. First, forced labor, then supervisors with whips, then impossible production quotas. The Israelites built entire cities with mud bricks, Pithom and Ramesses, which archaeology has already located in the Nile Delta. They carried clay on their backs under a 40-degree sun. They died on construction sites and were replaced the next morning. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied. And Pharaoh, frustrated, made the most brutal decision a ruler can make: kill the children. Every newborn Hebrew boy was to be thrown into the Nile River, not executed in secret, publicly drowned. The river that gave life to Egypt would become a graveyard for babies. It is in this scenario of horror that the most important man of Old Testament is born. A woman from the tribe of Levi hid her son for 3 months. 3 months of stifling a newborn's cry, locking doors, living in constant panic. When she could hide him no longer, she made a papyrus basket, waterproofed it with bitumen and pitch, placed the baby inside, and set it among the reeds on the banks of the Nile. The same mother who spent sleepless nights protecting her son now had to surrender him to the river, not for lack of love, but because of it. The baby's sister Miriam stayed hidden among the reeds watching, and the basket floated exactly to where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing. The princess opened the basket, saw the baby crying, and had compassion. She knew it was a Hebrew boy. She knew he should be dead, and yet she said, "I will keep him." Miriam appeared and suggested a wet nurse, the baby's own mother. The mother was paid by Pharaoh to nurse her own son, and the princess gave him an Egyptian name, Moses, because I drew him out of the water. Moses grew up in the palace. Egyptian education, Egyptian language, Egyptian privileges. Acts 7:22 says he was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action. He was, for all intents and purposes, a prince, the adopted grandson of the man who enslaved his own people. At 40, Moses went out to see the reality. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew. He looked around, killed the Egyptian, and buried the body in the sand. The next day, 2 Hebrews were fighting, and when Moses tried to intervene, one of them threw it in his face. "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Moses fled. He crossed the Sinai desert and reached Midian, where he became a shepherd, from prince to fugitive to shepherd. 40 years in the palace, 40 years in the desert, 80 years of preparation for a mission he never asked for. And then, on an ordinary day, shepherding his father-in-law's flock near Mount Horeb, Moses saw something impossible, a bush on fire that was not consumed. The flames burned, but the leaves remained intact. He approached, and from the middle of the fire a voice called, "Moses, Moses, take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses covered his face. He was afraid to look at God. And God said, "I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out. I am concerned about their suffering, and I have come down to rescue them. 400 years. 400 years of silence and slavery. And now, in the middle of nowhere, to an 80-year-old shepherd who stuttered and had a homicide on his record, God finally spoke. I am who I am. That was the name God gave himself. In Hebrew, YHWH. The God who simply is. Without beginning, without end, without explanation. And he sent Moses back to Egypt with a simple message for Pharaoh. Let my people go. Moses returned. He faced Pharaoh, and Pharaoh laughed literally. Who is the Lord that I should obey him? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go. Then the plagues began, 10 in total, and each of them was not random. It was a direct attack on an Egyptian god. The water of the Nile turned to blood. The Nile was sacred, worshipped as the god Hapi. God turned the object of worship into an object of revulsion. Frogs covered the entire land, and the frog goddess Heket could do nothing. Gnats, flies, plague on livestock, boils on skin. Each plague escalated. Each plague proved that the gods of Egypt were powerless before the God of the slaves. The 7th plague brought a storm of hail with fire. The 8th, locusts that devoured everything that remained. The 9th, 3 days of total darkness. Darkness that could be felt, the text says. In a country that worshipped Ra, the sun god, the sun simply went out. And Pharaoh hardened his heart. Plague after plague, he saw his country being destroyed and refused to yield, because freeing the Hebrews meant admitting that their God was greater than all the gods of Egypt combined. The 10th plague changed everything, the most terrible of all. The angel of death would pass through Egypt at midnight and kill every firstborn, of humans and of animals. From Pharaoh to the prisoner, no one would be safe. Except those who did one thing, kill a lamb without defect and smear the blood on the doorposts and lintels of the door. When the angel saw the blood, he would pass over that house. In Hebrew, Pesach, Passover. Each Israelite family did as they were instructed. They roasted the lamb with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. There was no time for the dough to rise. They would eat standing up with sandals on their feet and staff in hand, ready to run. It was a meal of urgency, a meal of flight. Now, at midnight, the cry cut through Egypt. Exodus 12:30 says that there was not a house without someone dead. Pharaoh's son, the sons of the generals, the sons of the bakers, death at every door, without blood. Pharaoh called Moses in the middle of the night. This time, he didn't negotiate. Leave, and take everything. The Egyptians pushed gold, silver, and clothes into the hands of the Israelites, just so they would go away quickly. An entire people left Egypt that dawn. 600,000 men on foot, not counting women and children. A human column marching out of the most powerful nation on earth. But Pharaoh changed his mind. He always does. He gathered 600 war chariots, the most lethal military technology of the Bronze Age, and went after them. The Israelites reached the edge of the Red Sea. In front, water. Behind, the Egyptian army raising dust on the horizon. No boats, no weapons, no way out. And they did what they would do repeatedly for the next 40 years. They complained. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us to the desert to die? Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and God sent an east wind that blew all night long. The water divided. It didn't gently recede. It formed walls of water on both sides, with dry ground in the middle. The Israelites passed through walking between liquid ramparts, with fish trapped vertically on both sides, while the ground beneath their feet was firm earth. When the last Israelite crossed and the first Egyptian was in the middle of the corridor, the walls collapsed. Chariots, horses, soldiers swallowed. Exodus 14:28 says that not one of them survived. The most feared army in the ancient world, eliminated in minutes. On the other side, Miriam, the same girl who watched the basket in the Nile, took a tambourine, and the women of Israel danced. They sang the first hymn recorded in the Bible, "Sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. Both horse and driver he has hurled into the sea." They were free. For the first time in 400 years, the people of God belonged to no one but God. But freedom without direction is chaos, and God knew that. 3 months after leaving Egypt, the Israelites camped at the foot of Mount Sinai, and God came down. The entire mountain trembled. Fire on the top, smoke like that of a furnace, the sound of a trumpet that grew louder and louder. The entire people recoiled in terror. Exodus 19 says that even Moses trembled. God established a perimeter around the mountain. Any person or animal that touched the mountain would die. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a law of spiritual physics. The holiness of God was so intense that proximity without permission meant destruction. And there, on that smoking mountain, God dictated the 10 Commandments. Not suggestions, not advice, commandments carved in stone by the very finger of God. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an image. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord. Remember the Sabbath day. Honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony. You shall not covet. 10 laws. 4 about the relationship with God. 6 about the relationship between people. An entire constitution compressed into fewer words than a rental agreement. And upon these 10 phrases, all Western legislation would be built. It is settled. Human rights, penal codes, ethical foundations. The DNA of all of this is in the tablets Moses carried down in his arms. But God didn't stop at the 10 Commandments. He gave Moses more than 600 additional laws. Laws on hygiene, diet, justice, property, marriage, debt, slavery, war, agriculture. A complete civil, criminal, and religious code. Detailed instructions for the construction of the tabernacle, a portable tent that would be God's dwelling in the middle of the camp. Moses went up the mountain and stayed there 40 days, without food, without water, in the direct presence of God, receiving the instructions. And meanwhile, down below, the people couldn't stand the wait. 40 days without a leader, 40 days without knowing if Moses was alive or dead. And what did they do? They went to Aaron, Moses' brother, the high priest, the number 2, and said, "Make us gods who will go before us." Aaron asked for their gold earrings, the same gold the Egyptians had given them on the night of the escape. The gold of liberation became the material for idolatry. Aaron melted it all down and fashioned a golden calf, and the people bowed before a statue made of their own jewelry and said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." 40 days. It took only 40 days for a people who saw the sea open, who ate manna from heaven, who drank water from a rock, who followed a pillar of fire by night and a cloud by day, to bow before a piece of melted metal. When Moses came down and saw the scene, the calf dancing, the naked and uncontrolled people, he threw the tablets of the law on the ground. The tablets written by the finger of God shattered at the foot of the mountain where God had just spoken. The symbolism is brutal. The covenant was broken before it was even implemented. God wanted to destroy the entire people. He said to Moses, "Now leave me alone so that my anger may burn against them, and that I may destroy them. Then I will make you into a great nation." God offered Moses the same deal given to Abraham, but over the ruins of Israel, and Moses refused. He interceded. He argued with God. "What will the Egyptians say? That you brought this people out of Egypt to kill them in the mountains?" Moses used God's own reputation as an argument, and God listened. The text says that God relented and did not bring on his people the disaster he had threatened. 3,000 people died that day as a consequence of idolatry, but the people survived. The covenant would be remade. New tablets would be carved. The story would continue, bruised but not ended. And from that moment on, the journey to the Promised Land turned into a slow-motion disaster. The journey from Sinai to Canaan would take, in a straight line, about 11 days. It took 40 years. God sent 12 spies to scout the land, one from each tribe. They returned after 40 days, carrying a cluster of grapes so large it took 2 men to carry it. The land was everything God had promised: fertile, abundant, overflowing with milk and honey. But 10 of the 12 spies said, "We can't do it. The people there are giants, the cities are fortified. We are like grasshoppers compared to them. We are going to die." Only 2, Joshua and Caleb, said, "Let's go. God is with us. If he promised, he delivers." The people chose to listen to the 10. They cried all night. They wanted to go back to Egypt, go back to slavery. They preferred known chains to a freedom that required courage. And God said, "You don't want to enter? Then you won't enter. This entire generation will die in the desert. Your children, they are the ones who will step on the land you refused." 40 years. 1 year for each day the spies spent in the land. And so it was. An entire generation dragged itself through the Sinai desert. They ate manna every morning for 40 years. The text says manna tasted like honey wafers and appeared with the dew, like a thin white layer on the sand. Their clothes did not wear out, their feet did not swell, but all of them, one by one, died without seeing the promise fulfilled. Moses, too, the greatest leader Israel ever had, made a mistake at Meribah. God told him to speak to a rock so that water would come out of it. Moses, furious with the people's complaints, struck the rock twice with his staff. Water came out. But God said, "Because you did not trust in me enough to honor me as holy in the sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this community into the land I give them." Moses guided the people for 40 years. He faced rebellions, wars, plagues, droughts. He went up the mountain, came down the mountain, interceded for the people hundreds of times. And at the end, in the last chapter of Deuteronomy, God took him to the top of Mount Nebo and showed him the entire land. From north to south, from Gilead to Dan, from Naphtali to the Negev. Everything Abraham dreamed of, everything Isaac waited for, everything Jacob fought to achieve. God said, "This is the land I promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you will not cross over into it." Moses died there. At 120 years old, his eyes were still perfect, his vigor intact. God buried him in a valley in Moab, and the text says that to this day, no one knows where his grave is. The greatest prophet of Israel, buried personally by God, in a place that no human being has ever found. Israel wept for 30 days, and then they rose, because on the east bank of the Jordan River, a new leader was already standing, Joshua, the spy who 40 years earlier had said, "Let's go. God is with us." And now, finally, it was time to enter. The Jordan River during harvest time overflows. The waters come down from Mount Hermon, carrying the spring snowmelt, and the river, normally narrow, spreads across nearly 2 kilometers of floodplain. This was the barrier between the desert and the promise. God said to Joshua, Tell the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant to step into the river, not after the water stops, not when it's safe, now, with their feet in the current. And the instant the soles of the priests' feet touched the water, the Jordan stopped. Upstream, near a town called Adam, the water piled up like a wall. Downstream, the riverbed dried up, and the entire people, hundreds of thousands of people with children, flocks, and wagons, crossed the Jordan on foot in the middle of the dry bed, while the priests held the ark at the exact center of the river. 40 years earlier, their parents had crossed the Red Sea. Now the children were crossing the Jordan. The generation that refused to enter was dead. The generation born in the desert was stepping for the first time on the land they had nursed on through the stories told around campfires for 4 decades. But the land was not empty, and the first thing in the way was Jericho, a fortified city with double walls. The outer wall was nearly 2 meters thick, the inner more than 3. Between them, houses were built in the gap. Archaeology has found these walls. It found the remains of the collapse. Jericho was the gateway to Canaan, and everyone knew the Israelites were coming. Rahab, a prostitute who lived in the wall itself, told Joshua's spies, "We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you. Our hearts melted in fear. No one has any courage left to face you." She hid the spies, hung a scarlet cord from her window as a sign, and when the walls fell, her house was the only one left standing, a foreigner, a prostitute, saved by faith. And when you open Matthew chapter 1, there is her name, Rahab, in the genealogy of Jesus Christ. The strategy to conquer Jericho didn't come from any military manual. God said, "March around the city once a day for 6 days. 7 priests blow 7 trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. No shouting, no attacking, just marching." Imagine the scene from inside the wall. Day 1, the Israelites appeared, do a full lap and leave. Day 2, the same thing. Day 3, 4, 5, 6, total silence. Only the low sound of the trumpets and the noise of footsteps on the earth. The psychological tension must have been unbearable. On the 7th day, they marched 7 times. And on the 7th lap, Joshua shouted, "Shout, for the Lord has given you the city." The people shouted. The trumpets sounded and the walls collapsed. They didn't crack. They didn't give way slowly. They fell flat, from the top down, as if the ground beneath them had simply given up on existing. Archaeology confirms the walls of Jericho collapsed outward, not inward, which contradicts a conventional attack where battering rams push walls inward. Something knocked those walls down from inside out. If that gave you chills, comment below. The walls fell. Now we stand. With Jericho open, the conquest of Canaan lasted about 7 years. Joshua led campaign after campaign. 31 kings were defeated. The land was divided among the 12 tribes by lot. Each family received a specific portion, a permanent inheritance, property that passed from father to son. For the first time since Abraham, the people of God had an address. They had land, they had borders, they had roots. And in his final days, Joshua gathered all the people at Shechem, the same place where God had first appeared to Abraham centuries before, and asked the most important question in the history of Israel: "Choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your ancestors served beyond the Euphrates, the gods of the Amorites, or the Lord." And then he said the phrase that echoes to this day, "As for me and my household, we will serve the Lord." Joshua died at the age of 110, and with him died the last witness of the crossing of the Jordan, the walls of Jericho, the conquest. Judges 2:10 records the most terrifying phrase in the Old Testament. Another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. An entire generation forgot. Not that they had never heard. They forgot because they had never experienced it. And what followed was the most chaotic, violent, and unpredictable period in the entire biblical narrative. The era of the Judges. not judges of robe and gavel, military and spiritual leaders who arose in moments of crisis, liberated the people, and then disappeared. The cycle was always the same. Israel worshipped other gods. God delivered Israel to their enemies. Israel cried out for help. God raised a judge. The judge liberated the people. The people obeyed while the judge lived. The judge died. Israel went back to worshiping other gods. Repeat 12 times. Deborah judged Israel under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel, a woman in a patriarchal society in a position of absolute authority. When the Canaanite general Sisera threatened Israel with 900 iron chariots, Deborah summoned Barak to lead the army. Barak said, "If you go with me, I will go." Deborah went, and she warned, "The honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." And he did. Sisera fled the battle and hid in the tent of Jael, a Kenite. She gave him milk, covered him, waited for him to fall asleep, and drove a tent peg through his temple, through his skull, and into the ground. The Bible does not filter the violence. It doesn't romanticize war. It records what happened, with all the blood that came with it. Gideon was the least in the weakest family of the most insignificant tribe. When the angel of the Lord appeared to him, Gideon's threshing wheat, hidden in a winepress, a tank for pressing grapes, because he was afraid the Midianites would steal the harvest. The angel said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." Gideon must have looked around to see if the angel was talking to someone else. God told him to gather an army. 32,000 men showed up. God said, "Too many. Send home anyone who is afraid." 22,000 left. 10,000 remained. God said, "Still too many. Take the 10,000 to drink water at the river. Anyone who kneels to drink, send home. Anyone who laps the water with their hand to their mouth without taking their eyes off the horizon stays." 300 men. God reduced the army from 32,000 to 300 against a Midianite army that the text compares to locusts with countless camels. And with torches inside clay jars and trumpets, the 300 surrounded the camp at night, broke the jars, blew the trumpets, and shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." The panic was so absolute that the Midianites began to kill each other in the darkness. And then came Samson, the strongest and weakest man in the Bible at the same time, a Nazirite from the womb, consecrated to God, with the prohibition of cutting his hair, touching dead things, or drinking wine. He violated all 3 vows. He killed a lion with his hands and then took honey from the carcass. He attended parties with wine, and he fell in love with the wrong women repeatedly. Samson killed 1,000 Philistines with the jawbone of a donkey. He tore off the gates of Gaza, heavy wooden doors reinforced with bronze that would take 10 men to move, and carried them on his shoulders up a hill. His physical power was supernatural, but his emotional weakness was as great as his strength. Delilah asked 3 times for the secret of his strength. He lied 3 times. She betrayed him 3 times, and the 4th time he told the truth. "If my head is shaved, my strength will leave me." He slept on her lap. She called a man to shave off the 7 braids, and Samson woke up thinking he would go out as before. But the text says the saddest phrase in the book. He did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines gouged out his eyes, shackled him, and put him to turn a grain mill like an animal. The strongest man in the world, blind and enslaved, walking in circles, but his hair grew. And on a feast day, the Philistines brought Samson to the temple of Dagon to entertain them. 3,000 people on the roof, plus hundreds inside the temple. Samson asked the boy guiding him to lean him against the 2 central pillars. And he prayed for the last time, "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more." He pushed the pillars with both hands. The entire temple collapsed. Samson killed more Philistines in his death than in his entire life. The book of Judges ends with a phrase that is both a summary and an epitaph. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. No king, no law, no center, every tribe for itself. The people who had received the most detailed covenant in human history were living in absolute chaos, and it was into this vacuum that Samuel emerged. His mother, Hannah, was barren. In a world where a woman's value was measured by the children she produced, Hannah lived in humiliation. She went to the tabernacle at Shiloh and prayed with such intensity that the priest Eli thought she was drunk. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. The pain was so deep that prayer became only movement. God heard. Samuel was born, and Hannah, fulfilling her promise, delivered the boy to the tabernacle as soon as he was weaned. 3 years old, maybe 4, living in the temple, sleeping beside the Ark of the Covenant. One night, a voice called, "Samuel." He ran to Eli. "I did not call you, go back to sleep." Again, "Samuel." Again he went to Eli. The third time Eli understood. "If he calls again, say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" And God spoke to a boy what the adults did not want to hear, that Eli's priesthood would be destroyed because his sons were corrupt, and he had not rebuked them. Samuel grew up, and every word he spoke came true. Israel recognized. After centuries, there was a real prophet among them again. And what did Israel do with this prophet? They asked for a king, not just any request, a rejection. 1 Samuel 8:7. God said to Samuel, "It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king." The people looked at the nations around them, Egypt, Assyria, Philistia, and wanted to be the same. They wanted a man on a throne, with a crown and an army, instead of an invisible God who spoke through prophets. Samuel warned, "A king will take your sons for war, your daughters for the kitchen, your fields for himself, 1/10 of your flocks. When that day comes, you will cry out for relief from the king you have chosen, but the Lord will not answer you in that day." The people heard the entire warning and replied, "No, we want a king over us." God granted it. Saul, from the tribe of Benjamin. The text describes that he was a head taller than any of the others. From his shoulders up, he stood out in the crowd, handsome, imposing, with the presence of a king. He started humble. When Samuel anointed him, Saul was looking for his father's lost donkeys. When he was presented to the people as king, he hid behind the baggage. But power does things to people. Saul offered a sacrifice that only the priest could offer. Because Samuel was late and the Philistine army was approaching, impatience disguised as devotion. Later, in a war against the Amalekites, God commanded him to destroy everything. Saul spared the enemy king and the best animals. When Samuel confronted him, Saul said, "I kept the animals to sacrifice to the Lord." Samuel responded with one of the most cutting phrases in all of Scripture. "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice." And then, "Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king." Saul wept. He grabbed Samuel's robe, and it tore in his hand. Samuel said, "The Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today, and has given it to one of your neighbors, to one better than you." That next person was a ruddy teenager who tended sheep in Bethlehem. God sent Samuel to Jesse's house to anoint the new king. Jesse presented 7 sons, tall, strong, with the appearance of warriors. God rejected them all. Samuel asked, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse said, "There is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep." No one called David to the ceremony. His own father didn't think it was worth bringing him in from the field. But when the boy entered, ruddy with bright eyes, God said, "Rise and anoint him. This is the one." First, Samuel 16:7 explains the criteria. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. David was anointed king of Israel in a backyard, smelling like sheep, without anyone outside the family knowing. And the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David from that day on. At the same time, the text says that the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and an evil spirit tormented him. The two kings coexisted now, one with the crown and without God, the other with God and without the crown. And then the Philistines brought their champion, Goliath of Gath, 3 meters tall, according to the Hebrew text. Bronze armor weighing 57 kilograms. The tip of his spear weighed nearly 7 kilograms. Just the tip. A shield bearer carried a massive shield ahead of him. For 40 days, morning and evening, Goliath stepped out from the Philistine lines and shouted the challenge, "Send a man to fight me. If he wins, we will be your slaves. If I win, you will be ours." 40 days, 80 challenges, and not a single Israelite soldier moved, not even Saul, who was the tallest of them all. David had gone to bring cheese and bread to his older brothers in the army. He heard the giant shouting, he heard the cowardly silence of the camp, and he asked, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?" His brothers told him to shut up. Saul said he was only a boy. David said, "I have killed both the lion and the bear that attacked my sheep. This Philistine will be like one of them." Saul offered his own armor. David put it on, tried to walk, and took it off. He wasn't used to it. He picked 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in his shepherd's bag, and walked toward the giant with a sling in his hand. Goliath was offended. "Am I a dog, that you come at me with sticks?" He cursed David by his gods. He promised to give his flesh to the birds and the beasts. David responded by running. He didn't retreat. He didn't stop. He ran toward the giant. He put a stone in the sling, swung it, and let go. The stone hit Goliath's forehead and sank into his skull. The giant fell face down on the ground. David had no sword. He ran to the body, pulled Goliath's own sword, and cut off his head. The Philistines, seeing their champion decapitated by a boy, fled. Israel pursued and won one of the most decisive battles in its history. And David, the shepherd, the youngest, the forgotten, became the most famous man in the kingdom in a single day. Saul brought him to the palace. Jonathan, Saul's son, loved David as a brother. The people sang in the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." And in that moment, in Saul's eyes, something broke. Admiration turned to envy. Envy turned to paranoia. And paranoia turned into a manhunt. Saul tried to kill David with a spear, twice, while David played the harp to soothe his torments. He missed both times. He sent David into suicidal battles, hoping he would die. David returned with more victories. He offered his daughter in marriage for an impossible price, 100 Philistine foreskins. David brought 200. Every attempt to destroy David only made him greater. Saul summoned the entire army to hunt a single man through the desert of Judah. David lived in caves in En-Gedi, in the desert rocks, with a band of 400 men the text describes as those in debt, in distress, and discontented. The future king of Israel leading a group of outcasts. And twice, David had the chance to kill Saul. In the cave of En-Gedi, Saul went in to relieve himself, and David was hidden inside. His men said, "Now is the time." David approached and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Afterward, his heart smote him. "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master, the Lord's anointed." He refused to take by violence what God had promised through time. And that decision, that impossible patience in a man who could have solved everything with one sword stroke, is what separated David from all the kings who came before and after. Not strength, restraint, not talent, waiting. Saul died as he lived. Divide. At the Battle of Mount Gilboa, the Philistines massacred the army of Israel. Saul's 3 sons fell first, Jonathan among them, the best friend David ever had. Archers hit Saul. Wounded, cornered, with no way out, he asked his armor-bearer to kill him so he wouldn't be tortured by the Philistines. The armor-bearer refused. Saul took his own sword and fell on it. The first king of Israel died by suicide on a battlefield, with his sons dead beside him and his kingdom shattered. The Philistines found the body the next day, cut off his head, fastened the corpse to the wall of Beth-shan, and put his armor in the temple of their gods. When David received the news, he didn't celebrate. He tore his clothes, wept, fasted, and composed a lament that is considered one of the most beautiful elegies in ancient literature. How the mighty have fallen. Saul and Jonathan. In life they were loved and admired, and in death they were not parted. The man who was hunted by Saul for years wept for his death as if it were his own father's. David was crowned king in Hebron at the age of 30, first only over Judah, then 7 years later over all Israel. And first thing he did was something no leader before him had achieved. He conquered Jerusalem. The city was in the hands of the Jebusites, who thought the fortress so impregnable they mocked, "Even the blind and the lame can keep you out." David sent his men up through the water shaft, a vertical shaft carved into the rock, narrow and dark, that connected the Gihon spring to the interior of the city. The men climbed through the wet stone and took the fortress from the inside. Jerusalem became the city of David, and he brought the Ark of the Covenant there, dancing before it with such intensity that his own wife despised him from the window. The political capital and the spiritual capital merged into one place. For the first time, Israel had a center. David's reign was the Golden Age. Borders expanded from the Euphrates to Egypt, exactly what God promised to Abraham. A professional army, organized administration, psalms being composed, poetry that would be sung for 3,000 years. God made David the most important promise since Abraham. "Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever, forever, an eternal dynasty." But David was not perfect, and the Bible does not hide it. One spring afternoon, while his generals were at war, David walked on the roof of the palace and saw a woman bathing, Bathsheba. He sent for her. She became pregnant. And to hide the adultery, David tried to bring Uriah, her husband, back from the battle so he would sleep with his wife and think the child was his. Uriah refused to go home while his comrades were sleeping in the field, so David wrote a letter to General Joab and sent the letter by Uriah's own hand. The letter said, "Put Uriah in the front line where the fighting is fiercest and withdraw from him so he will be struck down." Uriah carried his own death sentence without knowing it. He died at the wall of Rabbah. The prophet Nathan came to David with a parable. A rich man had massive flocks. A poor man had a single ewe lamb that slept in his lap and ate from his table. When a traveler arrived, the rich man took the poor man's lamb to serve to the guest. David exploded in anger. "The man who did this deserves to die." Nathan pointed his finger and said 4 words that changed everything. "You are the man." And David did not justify himself. He didn't blame Bathsheba. He didn't fire the prophet. He said 3 words, "I have sinned." Psalm 51 was born from that night. "Create in me a pure heart, O God." David was not called a man after God's own heart because he never sinned. He was called that because when confronted, he broke. He didn't harden. He broke. Solomon, son of David and Bathsheba, inherited the throne and built what his father dreamed of but could not erect, the Temple of Jerusalem. 7 years of construction, 180,000 workers. Stones 12 meters long cut the quarry and transported without iron tools at the site. The sound of a hammer was never heard at the location. Interior walls lined with cedar of Lebanon, carved with flowers and cherubim. The Holy of Holies covered in pure gold, floor, walls, ceiling. When the ark was placed inside and the priests came out, a cloud filled the temple with such density that no one could stand. The glory of God had a physical address, but Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, committed the most predictable mistake in history. 700 wives, 300 concubines, many of them foreigners who booked their gods. and in his old age his heart turned. The man who built the temple of God built altars to Ashtoreth and Moloch on the same mountain. When Solomon died, the kingdom cracked. 10 tribes to the north, under Jeroboam. 2 to the south, Judah and Benjamin under Rehoboam, David's grandson. The north never had a faithful king. South had a few, but it wasn't enough. In 722 BC, Assyria swept through the northern kingdom. 10 tribes scattered, absorbed, disappeared from history. In 586, Nebuchadnezzar burned Jerusalem. Solomon's temple, which took 7 years to build, burned in one day. The Ark of the Covenant disappeared. No one knows where it is to this day. The people were dragged to Babylon, 70 years of exile, no temple, no land, no king. Everything that defined Israel was lost. And yet by the rivers of Babylon they sat and wept. And they remembered Zion, and they did not forget, because this is the story of a people who should have disappeared and didn't. Entire empires, Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, Greece, Rome, were born, dominated the world, and turned to dust. But the people who came from Sarah's barren womb, who survived famine, slavery, the desert, exile, and fire, this people still exists. They still read the same texts. They still sing the same psalms. They still light candles on the same Friday night. 3,500 years later, the promise made to a shepherd in the desert of Haran stands firm. And if you watch this far, the question that remains is not about them. It's about you. Because at some point in this story, everyone recognizes themselves. In Abraham's fear, in Moses' stubbornness, in Samson's weakness, in David's fall, in Hannah's patience, in Israel's rebellion. This is not a story about perfect people. It is a story about a God who insists on not giving up on imperfect people. If you made it to the end, click on the video appearing on your screen now. I prepared it especially for those who watch this one until the very end.